The bullet that shattered the Humvee's windshield came from nowhere, and suddenly, Petty Officer First Class Juliana Price was flying through the air as the vehicle flipped 3 times before slamming into a ravine. Her head cracked against something metal, stars exploded behind her eyes, and when the world stopped spinning, she was alone. Completely alone. The rest of her SEAL team was gone, scattered by the ambush, their vehicles racing away through the dust and smoke, trying to escape the kill zone standard protocol. If you can't extract everyone, you save who you can and come back for the rest. Except the enemy was already closing in, and coming back might not be an option. Juliana pulled herself from the wreckage, tasting of blood, feeling the desert heat hit her like a physical blow. Her M4 carbine was still strapped to her chest, miraculously intact. She had 4 magazines, 120 rounds, no radio, it had been crushed in the crash, no water, her camelback had ruptured, the precious liquid already soaking into the sand. And somewhere close, she could hear engines, trucks, lots of them, enemy forces converging on her position. She was miles from friendly lines, in hostile territory with no communications, no support, and no water in a desert that could kill her through dehydration in hours. The enemy would capture her, torture her for intelligence, probably execute her on video for propaganda purposes. They thought she was trapped. They thought she was finished. They thought one injured female SEAL stranded in the desert would be an easy target. What they didn't know was that Juliana Price had spent 18 months in the most brutal survival training the U.S. military could devise, that she'd graduated at the top of her SEAL class in desert operations, that she'd been specifically selected for missions in denied territory because she could do things other operators couldn't imagine. What happened over the next 72 hours would become a legend in the special operations community. How one SEAL survived impossible odds, turned hunters into prey, and made an entire enemy regiment wish they'd never found her. But before we show you how she did it, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because this story proves that Navy SEALs don't quit, don't surrender, and never stop fighting. Now, let's get into it. The mission had started 3 days earlier, at a forward operating base carved into the desolate landscape of hostile territory. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen gathered her SEAL team for final briefing in the operations tent, 8 operators who'd trained together for months, preparing for exactly this type of mission. Target is a high-value individual, Chen explained, tapping the photo on the screen. Enemy commander responsible for coordinating attacks against our forces. Intelligence puts him in this compound, coordinates on your tablets. We go in fast, extract him, get out before his security forces can respond questions. Petty Officer First Class. Juliana Price studied the mission parameters on her tablet, already identifying potential problems. The compound was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hostile villages with limited extraction options and no backup if things went wrong. It was a high-risk operation, but that's what SEALs did. Take risks others wouldn't, accomplish missions others couldn't. ROE, asked Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, the team's most experienced operator. Weapons tight unless fired upon, Chen replied. We want this guy alive for interrogation, but if it goes hot, you're cleared to defend yourselves with appropriate force. After the briefing, Juliana performed her pre-mission ritual, meticulously checking every piece of equipment, every weapon, every magazine. Her M4 carbine was customized to her preferences, upgraded trigger, enhanced optics, suppressor for close quarters work. She'd fired thousands of rounds through this weapon, knew its quirks and capabilities intimately. "Hey, Price," called out Petty Officer Danny Morrison, one of the team's breaching specialists. "You ready for this? It's going to be hairy out there." "Always ready," she replied, not looking up from her gear check. What Morrison and most of the team didn't know, what was buried in classified files they'd never see, was that Juliana Price's path to the SEALs had been anything but conventional. She'd grown up in Arizona desert country, learning survival skills from her grandfather, who'd been a survival instructor for military special operations. She could navigate by stars, find water where none seemed to exist, move through terrain without leaving traces. When she'd joined the Navy, she'd set her sights on the SEALs immediately, knowing it would be the hardest thing she'd ever attempt. The training had nearly broken her. 20-hour days, impossible physical challenges, instructors who seemed determined to make her quit. She'd persevered through Hell Week, through dive phase, through land warfare training, earning her trident through sheer determination and refusal to accept failure. Now she was here, about to go into hostile territory with some of the best operators in the world, ready to prove that she belonged on this team not because of diversity requirements, but because she could do the job as well as anyone. They loaded into 3 Humvees at 0200 hours, driving through the darkness toward enemy territory. Juliana rode in the second vehicle with Webb and Morrison, weapons ready, night vision goggles turning the landscape into shades of green. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, sand, rock, scattered vegetation that looked dead even in the best conditions. Command says air support is on standby, Webb informed them over the vehicle's intercom. Apaches at the border, ready to move if we need them. But they're not crossing into hostile territory unless we're in serious trouble. Politically sensitive, apparently. Politics? Morrison muttered. Always politics. We're the ones getting shot at, but politicians in safe offices get to decide what support we get. They reached the target compound at 0430, an hour before dawn. It was exactly where intelligence said it would be, a fortified structure on the outskirts of a hostile village, surrounded by walls and guard towers. Through thermal optics, Juliana could see heat signatures of sentries patrolling the perimeter. The assault went perfectly for the first 5 minutes. They breached the wall, neutralized sentries with suppressed weapons, moved through the compound with practiced efficiency. Chen's team found the target in an upstairs bedroom, still half asleep when they zip-tied his hands and began moving him toward extraction. That's when everything went wrong. The alarm sounded. Someone had found a dead guard faster than expected. Lights blazed throughout the compound. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions. What should have been a quiet extraction became a running gun battle as the SEAL team fought their way back to the vehicles. "Move! Move! Get to the trucks!" Chen ordered, laying down suppressive fire while her team hauled the prisoner toward the Humvees. They made it to the vehicles under heavy fire, but now the entire village was waking up. And worse, they could hear engines in the distance, enemy reinforcements responding to the alarm. Chen made the call every commander dreads. They had to leave immediately or risk the entire team being overwhelmed. The 3 Humvees roared away from the compound, racing through narrow streets while bullets sparked off their armor. They made it to the desert outskirts, accelerating toward friendly territory, thinking they'd pulled off a successful if messy extraction. That's when the ambush hit. Enemy forces had set up a blocking position along their escape route. Technical vehicles with mounted machine guns, RPG teams in elevated positions, a well-planned trap designed to catch them in a kill zone. The lead Humvee took an RPG hit, spinning out but still mobile. The third vehicle's gunner was hit, slumping in his turret. Juliana's vehicle swerved to avoid incoming fire, and that's when the IED detonated. The blast lifted the entire Humvee off the ground, flipping it through the air like a toy. Juliana had a moment of weightless confusion before physics reasserted itself and the vehicle slammed into a ravine, rolling 3 times before coming to rest on its side. Her head hit something solid, the turret mount, maybe, or the armored door. Stars exploded across her vision. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. She couldn't tell which way was up, couldn't remember where she was or what was happening. Training took over. Even dazed and disoriented, muscle memory guided her actions. Check for injuries. She could move all her limbs, nothing felt broken. Find your weapon. Her M4 was still attached to its sling across her chest. Orient yourself. The vehicle was on its side. She needed to get out before something caught fire. She kicked out the already shattered window and pulled herself from the wreckage, emerging into chaos. The other 2 Humvees were nowhere to be seen. Either they'd made it past the ambush, or they'd been destroyed. Smoke and dust obscured everything beyond 50 feet, and she could hear engines, close and getting closer. Her radio was crushed, smashed between her body and the vehicle's interior. During the crash, her camelback had ruptured, 3 liters of water already soaking into the sand beneath her feet. She had her M4, 4 magazines, a knife, a small first aid kit, and no way to call for help. And the enemy was coming. Juliana didn't panic. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she did what SEAL training had drilled into her through hundreds of hours of scenarios: assess, adapt, act. Her situation was bad, but not hopeless. She was injured, but mobile, armed, but low on ammunition, isolated, but not helpless. She needed to evade immediately. The enemy would converge on the crash site within minutes, expecting to find dead or wounded Americans. She needed to be gone before they arrived, leaving no obvious trail, buying herself time to think and plan. She moved away from the wreckage, staying low, using the terrain for concealment. The desert here was more than just flat sand. There were ravines, rock formations, scattered vegetation that could provide cover if you knew how to use it. And Juliana knew. Her childhood in Arizona desert country, combined with SEAL survival training, had taught her how to move through this environment like a ghost. She heard vehicles arriving at the crash site behind her, shouts in a language she didn't speak but understood the tone of: excited, aggressive, hunting. They'd found the Humvee and were searching for survivors. She kept moving, putting distance between herself and the enemy, her mind already working through the tactical problem she faced: no water. That was the most immediate threat. In this heat, already approaching 100 degrees even before noon, she'd be in serious trouble within hours without hydration. Dehydration would impair her judgment, slow her reactions, eventually kill her more certainly than any enemy bullet. No communications. She couldn't call for help, couldn't let anyone know she was alive and needed extraction. Her team would assume she was dead or captured. Standard protocol said they'd request satellite imagery to confirm, might send a recovery team if they could confirm her status, but that would take time she might not have. Limited ammunition. 120 rounds might sound like a lot, but in sustained combat against superior numbers, she could burn through that in minutes. Every shot had to count. Every engagement had to be on her terms, at ranges and times she chose. But she had advantages too. She was SEAL trained in escape and evasion. She understood desert survival. She could move through this terrain better than the enemy forces hunting her. And most importantly, they had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they were tracking a desperate, isolated American, easy prey. They didn't know she was a predator too. The first priority was water. Without it, everything else was pointless. Juliana oriented herself using the sun position and her memory of the map she'd studied before the mission. There should be a dry stream bed about 2 miles northeast, dry on the surface, but desert stream beds often had water if you knew where to dig. She moved toward it, using every bit of cover the terrain provided, stopping frequently to listen and observe. Behind her she could hear vehicles spreading out, the enemy organizing a search pattern. They were noisy, undisciplined, overconfident. That would work in her favor. It took her 3 hours to cover 2 miles, moving slowly and carefully, conserving energy in the brutal heat. By the time she reached the stream bed, her mouth was cotton dry, her head pounding, her vision starting to blur at the edges. Heat exhaustion was setting in faster than she'd expected. The crash had taken more out of her than she'd realized. The stream bed looked completely dry, but Juliana knew better. She found a spot where the sand looked slightly darker, slightly more compacted, indicating moisture beneath the surface. Using her knife and bare hands, she dug down about 3 feet until water began seeping into the hole. Brackish, muddy, but water. She used her shama, the tactical scarf every desert operator carried, to filter the worst sediment, then drank carefully, letting her body absorb the moisture slowly rather than gulping it down. It tasted terrible, but it was life. She filled her empty camelback, adding purification tablets from her first aid kit, then covered the hole to hide evidence of her presence. Water secured. Next priority? Evade pursuit until nightfall, then reassess. She heard engines approaching. The search parties were expanding their pattern, getting closer. Juliana moved up out of the stream bed onto higher ground, where she could observe without being seen. Through the heat shimmer, she counted 6 vehicles spread out in a loose search line. moving slowly across the desert, stopping periodically to check likely hiding spots. They were systematic, professional, not the undisciplined militia she'd hoped for. These were trained soldiers who knew what they were doing. That made things harder, but also more interesting. As the day wore on, the heat became a physical opponent. By early afternoon, the temperature had climbed past 115 degrees. Most people would have been incapacitated. Juliana had trained for this, countless hours in desert survival courses, learning to function in conditions that would kill unprepared personnel. She found shade where possible, minimized movement during the hottest hours, stayed hydrated with the water she'd secured, and she watched her pursuers make mistakes. The enemy soldiers were suffering in the heat, taking shortcuts in their search pattern, missing obvious hiding spots because they were focused on getting out of the sun. Their discipline was degrading as the day progressed. By late afternoon, some vehicles had given up active searching and were parked in what little shade they could find, their crews waiting for cooler evening temperatures. That gave Juliana an opportunity. One vehicle had parked about 800 meters from her position, its crew sitting in the shade of the truck drinking water, clearly exhausted from hours of searching in the brutal heat. They'd gotten careless, putting down their weapons, focusing on their own discomfort rather than maintaining vigilance. Juliana studied them through her rifle scope, counting personnel, noting their weapons and equipment. She could take them, ambush the position, secure their vehicle and supplies, maybe even their radio. It would be high risk, but it would also give her resources and mobility she desperately needed. She spent an hour planning the approach, studying every bit of terrain between her position and theirs, plotting her route to minimize exposure, identifying fallback positions if things went wrong. This was what made SEALs different from regular soldiers, the ability to slow down, think tactically, plan every detail before committing to action. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Juliana moved. She covered the 800 meters in 30 minutes, using every bit of cover available, moving when their attention was elsewhere, freezing when they looked her direction. By the time she was in position, 200 meters from their vehicle, with clear fields of fire, they still had no idea she was there. She settled behind a rock outcropping, steadied her M4 on the natural rest, controlled her breathing. 4 targets. She'd need to take them down before they could respond, before they could radio for help, before they could return effective fire. It would require precision shooting under combat stress, exactly what she'd trained for thousands of times. Target priority. Radio operator first, then the soldier closest to the vehicle-mounted machine gun, then the other 2. Fast, efficient, decisive. Juliana's finger found the trigger. She exhaled slowly, letting her natural respiratory pause settle her aim. Then she squeezed. The M4 cracked 4 times in rapid succession, controlled pairs, center mass, exactly as trained. All 4 enemy soldiers dropped before any of them could react. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 seconds. She waited, weapon trained on the vehicle, watching for movement, ready to engage again if needed. Nothing. All 4 targets down. She approached cautiously, weapon up, checking each body to confirm they were no longer threats. She felt nothing, no guilt, no remorse, just the professional detachment that allowed operators to do what needed to be done. These soldiers had been hunting her, would have captured or killed her given the chance. This was survival, pure and simple. The vehicle yielded a treasure trove of supplies, water, food, ammunition, maps showing the enemy's search pattern, and most valuable, a radio. It was on a different frequency than her team's equipment, but it was communication, and communication meant she could potentially call for extraction. Juliana loaded everything useful into the vehicle, then made a decision that would shape everything that followed. She could try to drive toward friendly lines, maybe 50 miles away across open desert where she'd be spotted immediately. Or she could stay mobile in the area, harass the enemy forces, make them focus on hunting her instead of whatever operations they'd been planning, and wait for an opportunity for extraction. She chose the latter, because sitting in SEAL training, in classified sessions about operating in denied territory, she'd learned a fundamental truth. One highly trained operator with good tactical sense could tie down enemy forces far beyond their individual combat power. She could be a ghost that kept them looking over their shoulders, that disrupted their operations, that made them afraid. She would become their nightmare. Over the next 2 days, Juliana waged a one-person guerrilla campaign against the enemy forces searching for her. She hit their patrols when they were most vulnerable, during the brutal afternoon heat when discipline flagged. She ambushed their vehicles when they were isolated from support. She destroyed their supplies when they were unguarded. She used every advantage the terrain and her training provided. SEALs learned to operate in small teams because small teams could move faster, hide more easily, strike unexpectedly. Alone, she had even more flexibility. She could set up ambush positions that would be impossible for larger units. She could hide in places that wouldn't conceal multiple people. She could move silently through terrain that would betray a group. And she was smart about conservation. Every ambush was planned to maximize impact while minimizing her ammunition expenditure, long-range shots at static targets, using the enemy's own confusion against them, disappearing before they could organize effective responses. She was running a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, and her enemies were paying tuition in blood. On the 3rd day, things changed. She'd been monitoring the enemy radio. Her Arabic was limited, but she could pick up key words and phrases, and what she heard made her blood run cold. They were bringing in reinforcements, not just more soldiers, but professionals, special operations forces from their own military, trained specifically to hunt American operators in denied territory. The game was about to get much harder. That evening, as the sun set in spectacular desert colors, Juliana heard a sound that made hope surge in her chest. Helicopters. American helicopters, far in the distance but definitely ours. They were searching, which meant her team had reported her missing, which meant someone was trying to find her. She pulled out her signal mirror, a basic survival item she'd had in her kit, and began flashing it toward the distant aircraft, hoping they had sensors that could pick up the reflection. Again and again, she flashed the mirror, sending Morse code. SOS, SOS, SOS. The helicopters changed course, moving toward her position. But so did enemy vehicles. They'd seen the helicopters too, had figured out what the Americans were searching for, and were racing toward the same area. It was about to become a race. Could rescue arrive before the enemy did? Juliana grabbed the radio from the enemy vehicle she'd captured, switched to the emergency frequency she knew American forces monitored, and broadcast in the clear. Any station, this is Falcon 2-7, American SEAL requesting immediate extraction, heavy enemy presence, coordinates following. She rattled off her GPS coordinates, then repeated the message, praying someone was listening, praying they could get to her in time. The response came back immediately. Falcon 2-7, this is Reaper 5-1. We have your position, incoming for extraction, ETA 4 minutes pop smoke and mark your position. Be advised heavy enemy activity in your area. Copy, Reaper, I'll light it up, Juliana replied, already pulling a smoke grenade from her gear. But 4 minutes was an eternity when enemy forces were closing from multiple directions. She could see dust plumes from at least 6 vehicles converging on her position, could hear the engines getting louder. They knew where she was now, knew the Americans were coming, and they were determined to get to her first. Juliana made her stand on a small rise that offered good fields of fire in all directions. She popped the smoke grenade, bright orange smoke billowing into the evening air, marking her position for the rescue birds. Then she settled behind her M4, checked her remaining ammunition, 2 magazines left, 60 rounds, and prepared to hold this position until the helicopters arrived or she ran out of bullets, whichever came first. The first enemy vehicle crested a rise 400 meters out, its machine gunner already firing in her direction. Juliana took him out with 3 shots, then transitioned to the driver, sending the vehicle careening off course. The second vehicle tried to flank from the left. She engaged it with controlled bursts, forcing it to back off and seek cover, but more were coming. She could see them now, at least 4 more vehicles, all converging on her smoke. They knew they had her pinned, knew she couldn't have much ammunition left, knew that if they could just keep her engaged long enough, they'd overwhelm her position before the Americans could extract her. Juliana burned through her second-to-last magazine, holding them at bay. making every shot count, forcing them to respect her position even though they had overwhelming numbers. Her M4 was getting hot from sustained fire, brass casings littering the ground around her position. Last magazine. 30 rounds between her and capture or death. Then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the heavy thump of helicopter rotors, close and getting closer. 2 Blackhawks appeared over the ridgeline, door guns already firing, rockets streaking toward enemy positions, turning the battlefield into chaos. Falcon 2-7, Reaper 5-1 inbound for pickup. Get ready to move. One Black Hawk set down 50 meters from her position, its downdraft throwing up sand and debris, its crew chief waving frantically for her to run. Juliana grabbed her M4 and sprinted for the bird, enemy rounds kicking up sand around her feet, the door gunner laying down suppressive fire to cover her approach. She dove through the open door, hands grabbed her and pulled her aboard, and the Black Hawk was already lifting. Before she'd even gotten her feet under her, through the open door, she could see enemy vehicles still trying to close, but the helicopter's rockets and guns kept them at bay. "We got you! We got you!" the crew chief shouted over the rotor noise, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. 3 days, man! We thought you were dead! Juliana couldn't respond. The adrenaline crash was hitting hard, 3 days of stress and survival catching up with her all at once. She just nodded, slumped against the vibrating deck, and let the helicopter carry her toward safety. The flight to friendly territory took 30 minutes. During that time, the crew chief gave her water and medical attention for her injuries. Minor cuts and bruises, some dehydration, nothing serious. One of the SEALs from the other Black Hawk came over on the intercom. "Falcon 2-7, this is Lieutenant Commander Chen. Damn good to hear your voice. We thought we'd lost you." "Hard to kill, ma'am," Juliana replied, finding her voice again. "SEALs don't quit." "No, we don't. And you just proved it. Command is going to want a full debrief on how you survived 3 days in hostile territory with no water and limited ammunition. What you did out there, it's going to be studied, Price. You turned a disaster into a tactical masterclass." Back at the forward operating base, the entire team was waiting when the Blackhawks landed. They erupted in cheers when they saw Juliana emerge from the bird, battered and dusty but alive. Chief Webb was first to reach her, pulling her into a crushing hug that expressed more than words ever could. "You crazy, badass, incredible operator," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Do you have any idea what you did out there? We've been monitoring enemy communications. You had them terrified. They called you the Ghost, said you were everywhere at once, said you killed 20 of their soldiers in 3 days. 17, Juliana corrected automatically. I counted. The debriefing lasted 6 hours, with Juliana walking senior officers through every decision she'd made, every engagement, every survival technique. They recorded everything, took notes, asked detailed questions about her tactics and thought processes. What she'd accomplished, surviving alone in hostile territory, conducting successful operations against superior numbers, and ultimately evading capture long enough for extraction, was going to become mandatory study material for SEAL survival courses. "The thing that impresses me most," said Captain Rodriguez, the SEAL team commander, "is how you didn't just survive. You went on the offensive. Most operators would have gone to ground, tried to hide until rescue. You turned the tables and made them afraid of you. That's not just survival skills, that's tactical brilliance." "I was trained by the best, sir," Juliana replied simply, "and I had motivation. Those guys abandoned me, not on purpose, but still. I wanted to prove I could handle myself, that I belonged on this team, not because of any diversity requirement, but because I can do the job as well as anyone." "You proved that beyond any doubt," Rodriguez said. "In fact, you've proven something bigger. You've shown what's possible when training, skill, and determination come together. Gender didn't matter out there. Rank didn't matter. All that mattered was your ability to think, adapt, and fight. And you did all three better than anyone could have expected." Over the following weeks, Juliana's story spread through the special operations community, always in classified channels, never publicly, but operators talked. The female SEAL who'd survived impossible odds, who'd fought her way through enemy territory, who'd proven that toughness and capability had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with training and mindset. She received commendations that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Her tactics were analyzed and incorporated into training programs. And when the next class of SEAL candidates, including 3 women, went through survival training, they learned about what Juliana Price had accomplished, using it as inspiration for their own journeys. But the real impact was more personal within her team. There was no more doubt, no more questioning whether she belonged. She'd proven herself in the most absolute terms possible, alone, unsupported, against overwhelming odds. Every operator who'd ever worried that female SEALs might compromise team effectiveness had their answer. Capability was capability, regardless of who possessed it. 6 months after the desert incident, Juliana was promoted to Chief Petty Officer and assigned as an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. Her job: teach the next generation of SEALs how to survive in hostile territory, how to turn disadvantages into advantages, how to never quit no matter how bad things got. On her first day of instruction, she stood in front of a class of SEAL candidates, exhausted, beaten down by months of brutal training, wondering if they had what it took to finish. She looked at their faces and saw herself years earlier, struggling through the same doubts and challenges. "Good morning," she began. "I'm Chief Price, and I'm going to teach you how to survive in denied territory. Some of you may have heard stories about me. Some of those stories are even true. But here's what I want you to understand. I'm not special. I'm not superhuman. I'm just someone who refused to quit when things got hard, who adapted when plans fell apart, and who remembered that SEALs find a way. Always." She clicked to her first slide, showing satellite imagery of desert terrain. "Let me tell you about the time I got left behind in hostile territory with no water, no radio, and enemies all around. And let me show you how I turned that nightmare scenario into a tactical victory." As she taught, Juliana realized this was where she was meant to be, not just surviving impossible situations, but helping others develop the skills and mindset to do the same. Creating the next generation of operators who would judge on capability rather than characteristics, who would value results over stereotypes. The wolf had survived the desert. Now, she would teach others to be wolves too. Years later, when young female operators asked her advice about dealing with doubt and discrimination, Juliana always gave the same answer. "Don't try to prove you're as good as anyone else. That gives power to people who don't matter. Instead, prove to yourself that you can do the job, master your skills, complete your missions, excel at your craft. The doubters will either figure it out eventually or they won't. Either way, their opinions don't define your capabilities. Your actions do." Chief Petty Officer Juliana Price had been abandoned in a desert without water, hunted by enemy forces, facing impossible odds with limited resources. And she'd survived not just through luck, but through skill, training, and the absolute refusal to give up that defined every SEAL who'd ever earned the trident. They'd realized too late what they should have known from the beginning. Navy SEALs survive anything. Gender doesn't change that. Training and mindset do. And Juliana Price had both in abundance. The desert had tried to kill her. The enemy had tried to capture her. Circumstance had tried to break her. All of them had failed, because SEALs don't quit. They adapt. They overcome. They find a way. Always. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of brave women in uniform.